1. I'm going to start this out by saying that I'm a 24-year-old gay male. This experience happened a little over 4 years ago, along a time span of about 4 months or so. Therefore, I was 19 or 20 when this happened. This may be a little long because of all the details that I think make this story so unnerving. Anyway, I was going to a community college close to me when I decided to take this human sexuality class. It was actually a really hilarious class because the teacher's lecture was informative but structured somewhat like a stand-up comedy act. I was about 3 class days away from being done with the semester when I made contact with this girl named Annie, who spontaneously sat next to me. We were watching a video and she made it a point to laugh loudly at some funny things that happened. We sort of looked at each other and shared laughs during the whole class, even though we didn't talk. After this, we started talking before and after class. She told me all about her guy troubles. At this point, she knew of my orientation, probably assuming that I'm the stereotypical shopping buddy and relationship advice go-to. I'm not. Well, we hit it off regardless, and exchanged phone numbers. Before the class final, I got a more thorough look at her than I'd gotten before. There was something strange about her head. Her hairline seemed too far back on her forehead, and her hair was always in this ponytail that came out of the top of her head, not the back. I couldn't put my finger on it at the time, so I brushed it off. After the semester ended, she called and texted often over that winter break. This would have been okay, but all she wanted to talk about was this breakup situation with this guy that she'd known since high school. She was probably 21 at the time in this story. She kept asking me for advice and revealing more details about this guy, and how well they got along before a terrible car accident that almost killed her. She told me how it was a head-on collision, one that damaged her body so badly that she couldn't walk correctly and was still in pain a couple of years later. Now here is where things start falling apart. I never got a good idea of what the accident was like really because the details changed from time to time. We talked about this almost every time she called. She told me she was really athletic and skinny and pretty until this wreck that changed her life. When she talked of her injuries at first, she mentioned her legs being cut off. I thought it was far-fetched that her legs would have been severed, even though she was walking around pretty well around the time I met her. But I wasn't there and have no medical knowledge of pretty much anything, so I just clammed up. Later on, she changed the description to something like this. One leg was severed, and the opposite ankle was badly crushed. There were other variations on that too, spaced further apart in time. She recalled how this accident left her in the hospital for a long time. She gained a bunch of weight, being bedridden, and pushed away her boyfriend thing Jake. And he told me she didn't want him to have to deal with her in that condition. For the previous 2 years of recovery, he had been trying to get back with her, texting her a lot and trying to come over to her house to cry in front of her. But she mostly evaded seeing him in person. Now, by the time I'd learned all this, she started calling me 5 or 6 days a week. Each time she wanted to talk for at least an hour, but sometimes would keep me on the phone for 3. I did not want to be rude back then. I was sort of a pushover. So I answered and talked. She was generally pretty funny even when she talked about the same things, so it wasn't all terrible. Just very obnoxious when I was trying to work or relax at home. I tried hanging out with her to see if she'd chill on the calling, if we talked more in person. But she would always cancel at the last minute, saying stuff like she was too upset or that she suddenly was in Chicago with family. One day, she texted and asked me which, card store I worked at. I was suspicious and thus very vague with her, and just told her it was in Rockford, the same city where we went to college. Annie said she stopped by 4 or 5 different stores in the area to see if I was there. I was a little freaked out and curious, so I looked at a map of store locations and the stores aren't really that close to one another. She had to drive a pretty good distance to stop at any combination of 5 out of maybe 8 stores in the greater Rockford area. I was glad she didn't come into my store. I actually worked that day. This was when I was about done. I was ready to ignore her altogether, but she ended up being in one of my biology classes the next semester. I couldn't drop out because I would have gone below full time, and I couldn't switch because I had my job and school schedule planned out perfectly. Nothing else would work, so I endured her weirdness more and more. And I started saying that she had a friend named Josh she'd like to set me up with. He went to some university a few hours away. She said we had a lot in common and that he wanted to meet me. I asked for his number, but she never gave it to me. So we made plans to all hang out together, but plans always fell through for one reason or another. Now I'd stopped answering a lot of her calls because she had nothing new to say, besides asking advice on what to do about her situation with Jake, which she never followed anyway. She began telling me, "Oh, it's too bad you missed that phone call last night. Josh called you and wanted to hang out." I asked why he didn't call me from his own phone, because it was broken, she said. This happened enough times for me to realize that Josh probably didn't exist. Also around this time, she continued to talk non-stop about Jake and how she monitored his MySpace profile and sometimes watched him from a distance in places she knew he'd be. She was quite obsessive about him, which concerned me. When I finally lost my shit was when she told me to check her email to see if Jake had emailed her. She made some excuse about not having access to computer or internet. She sent me her email address and password, but I couldn't respond right away because I had to shower and get ready to go out with friends, which I told her. After showering, I was greeted by a text that read, "You know, you talk about going out with your other friends all the time, but you guys never really do anything." I was like, "How would you know what we do? I've never said anything to you about what I do with anyone else." We proceeded to have an argument about me not answering calls or responding to texts right away. I was fed up and just said, "Fuck it. I'm going to check her email and tell her what Jake said," so I did. From what he said in the most recent email, things weren't adding up about what she said regarding their relationship. I decided to go further back in her email history. I found a few disturbing things. She hadn't deleted any sent or received emails for 3 years, as far as I could tell. What I found was that not only had she never had a relationship with Jake, but he'd also never met her. He had no idea what she looked like, other than a yearbook photo from sophomore year in high school, in which she was neither skinny nor pretty, in his opinion. She had been stringing this guy along for 2 years, having on and off email and phone contact with him, saying she'd meet him and talk, but never actually following through. He never came to her house crying about a lost relationship. What's more disturbing is that she had done this to 3 other guys over the years, all people who had no idea what she looked like. She always promised to get together, but either made excuses or just stood them up and apologized later. The 3 other guys were much smarter than Jake and discontinued contact with her. She also emailed a friend named Brittany 2 years before this, pretending to be Annie's cousin. As Annie's cousin, she told Brittany that Annie had gotten into a serious accident and was in a coma. She never directly answered questions about how Annie was doing at this point or that. Then Annie emailed those guys she strung along, and other friends. She assumed the role of Annie's friend Brittany. In these messages talking about how horrible her accident was, and that she might not make it. The timing was not consistent. She emailed people as Brittany, saying that Annie was still in her coma. On the same day, she had started emailing guys as Annie, saying she had come out of the coma. I could tell she was writing all of the messages because she had a very peculiar way of typing and abbreviating words that needed no shortening. Example: typing O instead of or. Example 2. Typing the instead of that. I decided to use her email address to see if she had a profile on Facebook, and I stumbled upon a profile with no pictures. The name on the profile was Tara. By now I knew that her accident probably never happened, or at least wasn't as serious as she made it seem, and so I was creeped out. What would possess someone to tell all these lies? This is when she became more verbally abusive. She once said, "You're looking for masculine guys, but I don't think those are the kind of guys that would go for someone like you." I was so pissed I said, "What the fuck is that supposed to mean?" She continued to talk about my appearance, extremely skinny at the time, alternative clothes, etc. Then she told me that I was undesirable because I wasn't in my own place while I worked and went to school full time. Annie said, "You're not set in your life. Your daddy takes care of you and buys you everything." This is another situation where I asked her how she would have that information. I never discussed anything of the sort with her. My family isn't well off anyway, so I'm not sure how she came to that conclusion. She went on to say that I wasn't a good match for Josh, and she refused to set him up with me. I didn't really care because I already knew he wasn't a real person, but I didn't tell her that. Honestly, she must not have been much better off considering she mentioned living off of money from the accident, and couldn't decide whether she wanted to tell me that she had a job or that she didn't have one. It changed every other week. Every time she had a verbally abusive episode like this, she would later apologize and chalk it up to a simple misunderstanding through text. My ass. Now that I was angry with Annie, and afraid of her, I saw things that I didn't notice before about her appearance. I started sneaking glances at her in class, this time taking everything in. Then I realized what was wrong with her head. Her ponytail stood up at such an odd angle because her hair was basically one matted clump. It looked vaguely like how dog hair gets when it becomes overly tangled from neglect. The shape of her hair clump made her head look as if it continued up and back in a cone shape, instead of being dome like the way a normal person's hair would be. It never changed shape or angle from day to day, and I even saw the same colored fuzzballs in it across a span of several weeks. They never moved. I began to wonder if she showered or washed her hair, ever. She had dark hair, so these things were hard to see at first. One day, while we sat in class, she dropped a pencil. We went to pick it up at the same time, and the hair brushed my face, the bristles dragging across my lips. I was so disgusted. I'll never forget it. After that, I noticed other things about Annie. Her makeup was always heavily caked on, and too white for her skin color. The makeup around her eyes never seemed to change either, looking like she'd kept the same liner, mascara, and shadow on for weeks. It was all smudged around her eye sockets and lumped up on her cheeks. Her clothes barely ever varied, and she smelled sort of musty. Not the way you would think of someone working out and smelling sweaty, or not taking a shower for a while. She smelled like she crawled out of her basement cave dwelling to come to class. Another thing I saw was that her eyes looked sort of wild all the time, and she would focus very hard on my eyes when she was talking. Her gaze disquieted me. I had a hard time looking her in the face when we spoke. She just seemed really unhinged to me. Finally, despite claiming to still have leg pains from her accident that caused her to scream and cry in the mornings, she walked with no visible limp and wore Skechers shape-ups to walk around campus. I figured that the best way to deal with someone like this was just to walk out of her life without saying anything or angering her. I continued acting like her friend. As soon as that semester ended, I went to my service provider and told them she was harassing me. I got a totally different number for free. I never saw her around campus again or heard from her at all, besides that one apologetic email, which I ignored. 3 years after this, my friend Kathy said she was working with Annie's mom now. She knew she'd seen Annie visiting her mom at work from the description I gave her a few years before. Annie somehow found out that Kelly and I know each other, and she actually spoke to Kathy and told her that she and I used to be best friends. She suggested we all hang out, but Kathy, knowing what this girl was all about, gave her the runaround and never gave out my new number. Good friend. I'll never know what actually happened to Annie or why she lied so much. I don't feel that she was harmful in any way, but I was really afraid because You can never know what's going on in someone's head, with the extravagant lies and mood swings she showed. All I hope is that she can recover from whatever caused her to behave this way, and come to terms with the reality of her life, ultimately taking better care of herself. 2. This story takes place about 10 years ago, when I had just started grad school in a new city. At the time I was 22, female. I'd done the whole first time living away from home thing in college, but that had been at a very small school in a very small town, and several of my friends from high school had gone with me, so I was never completely on my own. For graduate school, I moved to a larger college town out of state, where I knew absolutely no one. I was nervous, of course, but I was more excited about meeting new people and getting to explore a new place on my own. I'd moved into a small apartment about 2 weeks before classes started, planning to give myself some time to learn the area and settle in. After a few days, however, I was thoroughly bored and getting desperate for someone to talk to. It was perhaps because I was so deprived of company that I responded when I received the first email from Jay. Jay said that he had found me via my Facebook profile. This was in the very early days of Facebook, before they had such fancy things as privacy settings, and when your email address, if listed, was very public. He said that he was also a new resident of College Town, and that he had moved here from India to study law. Yes, most of this sounds pretty fishy in retrospect. I can only blame my own general naivete, and the fact that social media hadn't been around long enough for me to have encountered many weirdos. To be fair, when I clicked on his profile, I did see a lot of the same movies, books, and music I liked listed in his interests, and the profile had been created several months ago, so it wasn't brand new. There were no pictures, but that also didn't seem terribly odd to me. This was before smartphones, and while digital cameras existed, they were expensive enough that most people I knew didn't have them. Most of my online photos, including those on Facebook, had been scanned and uploaded that way. I exchanged a few emails with Jay, mostly making polite small talk. It never got past that point because he was careful to deflect or ignore any questions I asked about his personal life, while continuing to ask me more and more about myself. I was uncomfortable enough that I told him I wasn't interested, and stopped replying after 2 or 3 messages. He sent me a few more emails, then stopped when he didn't get a response. Meanwhile, classes started, and I got distracted with coursework, a new job, and meeting new people in the real world. I didn't spare much of a thought for Jay until I came home one day, about 2 weeks into the semester, to find another email from him. I almost deleted it unread, but the subject caught my eye. It read simply, "Saw you today." The message went on to say that he had seen me eating lunch that day in the library cafeteria. I'd been wearing a red sweater and been reading a paperback book with a blue cover. He added that he'd also seen me on the bus ride home that afternoon, and that he'd noticed me getting off at the stop in front of my apartment complex. So he assumed that was where I lived. And what a coincidence, he said, because he lived in that same group of apartments. He went on to give me his apartment number, and asked me which one I lived in. At this point, I was more than a little panicked. Here I was in a strange town where I knew almost no one. It was a 4-hour drive to the nearest friend or family member. I could vanish completely and no one would miss me for at least a week. And while he could clearly recognize me in a crowded room, I still had no idea what this guy looked like. I could be sitting right next to him on the bus and never know. The one saving grace was that our apartment complex was enormous, and housed several hundred residents, most of whom were students. While I wasn't thrilled that he knew I lived there, at least he didn't know which unit I lived in. I should have just gone to the police then and there. But as I said, I was pretty sheltered, and part of me was still trying to think that this was some misguided attempt at flirting or something. Instead, I emailed him back saying that I found his behavior threatening and that if he attempted to contact me again, I would call the police. Then, as it was still early enough in the day, I printed off the emails and walked down to the apartment management office to let them know what was going on. If anyone would miss me when I was kidnapped and or murdered, it would be the people who collected my rent. The woman in the management office was every bit as creeped out as I was, and when I mentioned that I didn't even know what Jay looked like, she offered to help. Apparently the office staff took photos of all their residents when they signed their leases, and kept these on file. When they had done so for me, I had thought it was because they rented to a high number of students and probably had people try to skip out on their rent. Now though, I was wondering how much of it was because of cases like this. The woman returned with Jay's file, which matched the apartment number he'd given me. But when she pulled out his lease, there was no photo. Just a ripped corner where one had clearly been stapled at some point. No amount of searching in the file or the drawer turned up this picture. And I went home that night, even more disturbed than I had been previously. Over the next few weeks I got a little paranoid and started doing things that I thought would make it harder for an unseen stalker to keep track of me. I changed my schedule as much and as often as I could, taking earlier or later buses and sometimes walking home. I toured the cafeterias of campus, eating in a different location every day. I switched out my contacts for glasses and wore my hair down more often so it obscured my face a little. I also stopped wearing things like my bright red sweater and switched over to more neutral colors that would help me fade into the background. As I didn't receive any further contact from Jay, I figured this was a success. Then about 2 months later I had another encounter. To this day I don't know for sure that it's related, but I'm not a big believer in coincidence. I was waiting for the bus outside the library with a group of about 20 other students. The library stop actually acted as a mini bus depot, and about 5 different bus routes used it, so there was always a large crowd, with a bus stopping there every 5 minutes or so. As I was waiting, a guy came up to me and tried to strike up a conversation. That in itself wasn't that odd. I'm a pretty gregarious person, and I often chatted with other people while we waited. I admit, though, this wasn't someone I would have gone out of my way to talk to. He was probably only a few years older than me, but his greasy comb-over and very round beer belly made him look older. His clothes were wrinkled and looked like he'd slept in them. He was of Asian descent, and when he started talking, he had a very clear Indian accent. Initially, I didn't think much of it. My school had lots of students from all over the world, so the odds that this was the same Indian guy who had stalked me a few months ago were slim. Still, I did my best to politely indicate that I didn't want to talk. I think I pulled out the novel I carried with me for just that purpose, and started reading it. He kept trying to get me to talk to him, though. While I counted the buses coming and going, and watched the crowd around us shrinking as each bus departed. Eventually my bus arrived, and I eagerly boarded. Unfortunately, he did too. I probably should have been more worried, but this was the main bus line between campus and the part of town with all the student housing, so again, I thought this was just my bad luck to be stuck with this guy for another 15 minutes. It wasn't the first time I'd had to put up with some asshole on public transit, and it wouldn't be the last. In another attempt to discourage him, I selected the one seat at the front of the bus that sits all by itself, so he couldn't sit next to me. Undeterred, he just sat in the seat directly behind me, and proceeded to lean over the back of my seat, and stretch his arm out along the window side into my space. So I was surrounded by him on 2 sides. He asked me several times where I lived, and I deflected the question by slinging it back at him. He responded with the name of another large student apartment complex, about 3 stops past mine. Fuck. When we finally reached my stop, I was the first person off the bus. I breathed a sigh of relief to be rid of this guy, and paused to wait for traffic to clear so I could cross the street. There were lots of people milling about, and it wasn't until they started to disperse on the other side of the street that I noticed comb-over guy was standing next to me. "I thought you lived further on," I said, doing my best not to let my voice go all high-pitched and shaky like it does when I'm scared. Comb-over guy insisted that he did live a few stops further, but that he decided he wanted to visit his brother who lived here. And since we got off at the same stop, he insisted that he would walk me home to make sure you get home safe. Oh fuck, no, I told him no several times, but he kept insisting that it was no trouble, as if that was my concern. Of course, we'd been standing there arguing about it long enough that the bus was now gone, and most of the people who had gotten off here were walking away. As an added bonus, it was starting to get dark. I thought about just making a break for my apartment, but unfortunately, I lived in one of the buildings near the bus stop, so he would certainly see where I went. I decided to play for time, and get as close to the management office, which doubled as the laundromat, so was open 24/7, as I could before ducking inside. I hoped it was early enough that it would still be staffed. To be honest, I was also starting to go from scared off to pissed. This guy was hardly physically threatening, and I was cold and tired and just wanted to go home. But instead I was getting harassed by this asshole. I told comb-over guy that I lived in one of the farthest buildings in the back of the complex, almost half a mile's walk, and I didn't want to make him walk me all that way. When he again insisted it was no trouble, I suggested that we walk together until we either got to his brother's apartment or mine, and then said our goodbyes. My plan was that when we passed the office I would pull the "oh, I forgot, I have to ask about something broken," and duck inside. Comb-over guy agreed, and so began a pleasant evening stroll with a guy who may have been stalking me for several months. And here's where it takes an even stranger turn. As we got further and further back into the complex, we started seeing fewer people, and he started acting nervous, scared. He was looking around a lot, and kept asking me if we were almost there. Shouldn't I be the one getting scared here? I was just getting more and more annoyed, so being done with his shit by then, I just looked at him with a completely expressionless face and told him, "Not much further now," in my best deadpan voice. And that, at last, seemed to finally achieve what body language ignoring him and flat out telling him to go away had failed to do. He quickly made some excuse about needing to get home, turned on his heel, and headed back towards the bus stop at a fast clip. I just kept walking in the direction we'd been going, and eventually made a loop around the complex and came back to my building. I never heard from Jay again, and I never saw this guy on the bus or around campus either. I still don't know if they were the same person, but either way, it taught me a valuable lesson about dealing with creepers. 3. This might be a long post. I know we're not supposed to moan about story length, but just a heads up. I've told this story many times before, and as a result have seen it condense over many tellings. I'll try and return it to the full length as best I can. Another foreword is that this is still going on. It's just that many choices have been made since that have resulted in a much calmer atmosphere. She's still the crazy, delusional woman she always was, though. I just have more distance from her. So, the scene is the summer of 2010. I had just finished primary school. For you non-Brits, it's the place you leave when you're 10 before high school. And was ready to start the summer. Summers when you're 10 years or younger are typical. Maybe a holiday. We weren't and still aren't the most well-off family there is. So holidays were something to look forward to and enjoy as much as possible. Some sleepovers, maybe a theme park visit. Apart from that, just waking up whenever, watching TV, anything. I remember, being the inquisitive kid I was, I loved imagining. And being imaginative means you're sometimes a little nosy. I distinctly remember walking into my dad's studio He's a musician in a rock band. And seeing a ring on the table and thinking nothing of it, I mentioned it to a friend who was a little more concerned, saying my parents might split up. I was a little more on edge after that conversation, but the summer went ahead as normal. I remember finding a book in the kitchen titled Ways to Save Your Marriage, or something like that. Again, I just thought my parents were working something out. My mum was in the conservatory, and I went over to talk to her. I remember the conversation like it was yesterday. Me: "Are you and Dad splitting up?" Mum: "Yes." It's simple, I know. But above all, I remember the environment. I was looking out the window into our back garden, near the hut we kept the guinea pigs in. I remember turning to face my mum when she said yes, and just having this look of utter shock on my face. Being the overly dramatic 10-year-old I was, I threatened to run away into the valley, which is a huge forest and landscape behind our house, and stuff like that. I got some paper and pretended to write a book about how sad I was. I loved attention but was heartbroken at the same time. Not a good mix. The worst part was that I was starting high school in around a few weeks' time. You might think, that's okay, you have your friends to help you through it. Nope. I was moving to a new high school with only 2 people from my primary school going with me. 2 girls who never really spoke with me or had any friendship. I felt utterly alone. High school started September 2010. My dad had already moved out and gone to live in a flat somewhere miles away. I can't remember exactly where it was. I remember crying all the time and having my mum comfort me. I wasn't, and still am not, one of the tough lads who plays footy and drinks, etc., etc. I'm a musician and a programmer, and as a result got a lot of shit over the years for expressing myself in music, a couple YouTube channels I had, and overall being a little reclusive. So this didn't help with the situation at home. Whenever possible, I went over to see my dad. He had bought himself a flat. You walked into this small hallway, and his was on the left. There was another to the right, then a staircase that went upstairs to a few more places. I think it was around Saltire, as I remember going for walks around there somewhere around 2010-ish time. The apartment was nice on first glance. A fire, large window to look out onto the road, TV which my dad hooked his computer up to. And then upstairs with a bathroom and a bedroom, king-sized bed or something similar. It wasn't until I went to stay over a few times that the main issue kicked in. It was freezing. We dragged a heater next to us to play a board game once, and still shivered constantly. Sleeping was better, but still freezing cold. Above all, was a constant feeling of something being off. You could never settle properly because you felt so uncomfortable. One day the roof in the next apartment burst open, and the people inside had moved out a few days earlier or something. My dad wanted to leave after that. When he did move out, he learned that he was either the only person living there in the entire building, or there was another person who was hardly ever there. We also had to venture down into the basement once because the power cut out, and the landlord couldn't come over, so told my dad to do it. It was almost pitch black, and led to the realization that there was a back door which was kept shut, with a little chair leant against it. Anyone could have given the door a little nudge, and they would have been straight in. So my dad moved out. It turned out he'd been seeing someone else for months. Her name is Sue. So, Sue seems nice at first. My dad, quite suddenly, moves in with her, and then all the shit starts. I remember getting an email telling me that I had to come and see her, or something to that extent. Basically, I didn't want to see her, but the condition set forward was that I had to see her in order to see my dad. This left me distraught, but I eventually gave in. They pulled up one night, with my stepbrother in the back seat, Matt, Matt was around 9 years old or something like that. He was the nicest kid ever. And that makes looking back on it all the more painful. And above all, angering. Turns out Matt never saw his dad. Sue barred him from seeing him, so he instantly took a liking to my dad, and called him Dad too. Their house was small, and a spare room had been thrown around into a small room for me. For months, I'd see my dad for a few hours. Usually stay for the night, then go back the next day. I was fine with this. Seeing my dad made up for the fact that Sue was there too. But something about Sue was off. The same feeling from the flat Dad had. She was nice, but in a somewhat sinister way. She'd randomly offer to make some food, gone 10 o'clock at night. I'd start playing some music and she'd run in and turn the volume up and start jumping around all hyper. She'd sit with bottles of wine and just drink for hours, sometimes days, on end. She'd go without sleep. She'd sleep without waking up. She was absolutely the most insane woman I'd ever met. I thought she was tolerable. Until one night, my dad had gone with his band to play a gig somewhere. I was alone with Matt, Sue, and Sue's friend Faye. Sue had the hilarious idea to watch a horror film. Now, I love horror films, but seeing her suddenly jump up and declare we were watching one was weird and, quite frankly, jarring. I suggested Saw just to shut her up, and she said, and this was funny at the time, "If you want to watch a baby film, that's fine by me," or something similar. We laughed for a bit, but Sue sent Matt upstairs to go to bed. He was too young for something like Saw. Faye was really nice, and I'd made some trading cards for some monsters I'd made up or something on some website. I was going through them, sometimes printing them off, and making little games with them. She would usually join in or at least be interested. Faye seemed almost totally on my side. What I mean is that whenever Sue kicked off, Faye would usually defend me in some way. This was no exception. Sue randomly comes in and dumps a huge box of pictures from when her son, Anthony, was in the army. She goes through some pictures of another son of hers, Ross, and Matt too. This went on for a bit, but then, and this was one of the many jarring things about her, she randomly stood up and exclaimed, "Right, film in 10 minutes," and then turned the TV on. I went to a random number generator to see what Saw film. It said 4. These details are precise because I wrote down what happened that night, in case I had to provide it as evidence. One time, at Dad's old flat, we watched the first Paranormal Activity movie. I was a bit spooked by some bits. I was 10 years old when we watched it. She suddenly brought that up, saying now we couldn't watch Saw. I protested. She got angry. She suddenly said that all her children have tried it out on her, and I was getting upset. She's obviously been drinking, or just off on some weird mood swing, because she pointed to the door and told me to go to bed. I made out that the evening was becoming unfair, and then she said, "I'm telling you, as your stepmother, to go to bed." I was crying by this point, but Faye came with me. Sue comes barreling up the stairs with her phone in her hand. She tells me it's Dad, and he wants to speak with me. Faye protested, saying I didn't want to talk, but she pushed past her and shoved the phone in my face. I pushed it away. She said, "Stop hitting me!" At this point, you might see what kind of a person she is. A disgusting, compulsive liar. So I take the phone, Dad said, over the phone, to go and apologize right then and there. I would take myself downstairs and say I was sorry. So I did. Dad said I should say I'm sorry, so I'm sorry, or something like that. Well, she didn't like that. I apologized to Faye on the way past. She said I shouldn't be sorry. Sue was being unfair. Sue comes running up the stairs again, and Dad over the phone again. Says I shouldn't have said Dad said I should, or something similar. Dad would be home soon, so I was a bit scared. I said something stupid like I'm scared of being hurt, and she went downstairs. A while later, she was heard pacing up and down the downstairs corridor. Idiot! What happened? Did she break something? Is she shouting at the TV? No. You fucking arsehole, you piece of shit. You better pray your father still fucking loves you. I heard Sue and Faye arguing too. Sue shouted again. Anyone who puts Dad down is out. They're out. Never set foot in this house again, you fucking idiot, you piece of shit. Dad walks through the door. Sue must have said something like, "You're a fucking prick of a son," because Dad went ballistic. You, a mother, using language like that about my son. At this point, my dad was the best person in the world to me. He comes upstairs, turns the light on, and tells me, in an unexpectedly calm tone, to pack your bags. I shoved everything into whatever cases I brought, and made my way downstairs. As I was walking towards the door, Sue was leaning in the doorway shouting, "Well done. You've got what you wanted, well done. I hope you're fucking happy." And Dad pushed her back, shouting, back off," to her. He told me to sit in the car. Sue slammed the door and Dad got into the car. We drove for ages. Dad kept stopping the car because Sue kept calling him. He had to get out, answer it, get back in, and then carry on driving. The initial plan was to take me back home, but after it became evident it would be a ridiculously long trip back home, what with the calls and such, Dad made the somewhat crazy move to go back there. We both went back. It was like 3 to 4 a.m., so I went to sleep pretty quickly. I was tired nonetheless. In the morning I left with Dad and got home safely. When I told my mom about what happened, it turns out Dad only knew half the story concerning the events leading up to the outburst. My dad says he's never forgotten that, and would never forgive her for it. So my dad initially, or at least I believe, met Sue at his old workplace. Together they didn't really like their boss, and, being the controlling person she is, convinced my dad to start a business with her. Dad was, or at least I think he was, happy enough at his job to get by. He got paid enough and was valued there. So I believe when she started chipping away at him, he gave in and quit the job with her. So they did. It was composed of fragments of my own and Matt's name, of course. It won't contain Matt, because that's not his real name, but at the time, I felt really special and honored to have my name being used in a business. The company was an IT communications type thing, i.e. phone systems, company phones and the like. It started off okay, I guess. I'm still to this day a bit in the dark about how the company really operated. They seemed to have piles and piles of phone boxes and phone systems in their office, room with a few desks. And every time I went over, they just seemed to grow and never really go down in number. If anything, they moved them around rooms in the house just to fit more in. And you're probably wondering what happened after she went ballistic. Well, of course it remained in my mind, but wasn't something that was going to stop me seeing my dad. I started taking more and more of a liking to Matt, because now I knew what he had to deal with on a daily basis. Oh boy, she didn't like that. We used to go to this dodgy public swimming pool place. Now, Matt was terrified of going completely underwater. Kid, fear of drowning, they go quite well together. He's been to plenty of water parks and decided that the water is a bit of a scary place. I also had that same problem, but realized it's usually the people and not the water itself that's a bit scary. Being lost in a crowded swimming pool would just be a really bad situation for me. But as, like a 10-year-old kid, Matt would stand petrified at the entrance to the water slide, and I'd try my best to coax him onto them, but ultimately had to allow his decision to bail out. Now, being an only child, it kinda sunk my heart a bit to see him bail out, when I wanted someone to share my love of high-speed rides like roller coasters, water slides, etc. with. But had to come to terms with the fact that just wasn't going to happen. However, we both loved boss battles in video games, so pretended that whilst he laid on one of those huge pull float things, like a massive disc, I would jump out the water and shake the float to try and knock him off. Now, of course, I didn't purposely try and fucking drown the poor thing, but shook it enough to make him laugh and clutch on to stay on top of it and just generally have a good time. Yes, he would sometimes fall in and splutter a bit, but it was always an overreaction, as I always had him securely and quickly plucked him out and back to safety. Where was Sue, you ask? Sat drunk on the side, just spaced out on the makeshift beach they had. Dad stayed with her so she didn't fall in, I guess. So it was me and a 10-year-old kid who couldn't really swim. You can see where this is going. He falls off the float, and I don't see. So I see my dad who's frantically pointing at something. I turn to see Matt flailing about, and quickly drag him upwards. Quite a minor event, isn't it? Yes, I wasn't looking for a moment, but for God's sake, trusting a 12-year-old with essentially a 9 or 10-year-old's life was pointless, and very, very dangerous to say the least. Another anecdote. Dad, Sue and I went to a park together. We were playing football, and I can't kick as I'm nowhere near the sporty type. Yet I hit her square between the eyes. She takes it personally. We're in the car. I had a cardboard tube left over from some sweets. She leant her makeup-laden face between the seats, as she wanted a kiss or something equally as disturbing, and I didn't see her. I chucked the tube into the back seat, but instead it hit her in the face. She took it personally. These anecdotes seem a bit random, don't they? Well, I remember I used to get emails in which I was picked up on having done these things. And I used to get accused of trying to drown her son. Are you kidding me? He fell off the floaty for like 3 seconds and I picked him up again. There should have been a responsible adult in the water too. Kicking a football in her face. Yeah, I did. You make it sound like it was intentional though. Throwing a sweet tube at her face. This one pissed me off nearly as much as the Matt drowning one. She claimed it left a big bruise or something equally as stupid concerning a bruise on her face. Claimed it went all red or something and left a mark. Next time an empty cardboard tube the height of a couple of thumbs bops me on the nose, I'll try to give you guys an update before major emergency rhinoplasty. Spraying hairspray in her eyes. This was like their wild card. They draw this one out randomly. I can't remember doing this. I sprayed some spray in Dad's face a while before, and can't even remember why, but it wasn't her. And it wasn't relevant. So, about that business they had. The second Dad and Sue quit their jobs, they desperately tried to bring in some cash. Very slowly, and I mean very slowly, they began to bring in some money. It wasn't really much, forcing my dad to stop paying child benefits. This caused a huge tidal wave at home. Basically trying to make out that he was leaving me in the dust for his new family over there. Once money started to come in, I was taken out. We'd go to theme parks, water parks, mostly around Blackpool, but we did go to Lightwater Valley in Ripon a few times. And it was all a huge cover-up for how much of a time bomb Sue was. She'd still have little episodes, but nowhere near as bad as the aforementioned outburst. Dad would give me something like £10 and let me loose in a game shop for a bit, along with Matt. We're both Nintendo people, so we just got Pokemon, Mario, Zelda stuff, and played co-op whenever we could. Basically, Matt and I were together as one against Sue. I felt like a brother to him, and he looked up to me as one. It was weird at first, but soon it became nicer because I knew he had been desperate for someone like me to come along. Ever since Sue savagely cut off the connection between him and his dad. My dad tells me they're moving house. Only down the road or something like that. I take it as a fresh start. It's time to just leave the events of that one fateful night in that room and move somewhere else. The first time I went to the new house, it was quite nice. It was a lot roomier. There was a much larger living room, definitely an upgrade. I assumed they bought this new house with their money and still didn't pay my child support, which, as I said before, continued to ruffle everyone at home's feathers. It became slightly angering every time I went over, though. My dad had taken up smoking again. He stopped just after I was born. 1, to cope with the stress, but 2, because she was doing it. They'd close the kitchen door and just puff for hours on end. You'd walk in to get a drink, and just this cloud of smoke would billow out. Now, I don't really do great with smoke. Makes my lungs hurt and shit. It's probably a placebo, but still caused me discomfort. I'd cover my nose and mouth with my jumper if he started smoking in the car, which he did eventually, and the like. Sometimes this annoyed Dad, but I did it for my own good. Wasn't my fault he was giving himself cancer. I regularly argued about trying to get him to stop, but just gave up in the end. They made up a spare room for me, again, but this time Ross was around a lot more, and practically moved in. Ross randomly got stabbed one time, and we had to get up in the middle of the night to go see him in hospital. Not a very nice area to be in, as you can guess. So, Matt was around him a lot more, because they really are brothers. But Matt still loved to take advantage of the fact I write stories and wanted me to do these interactive stories. Like those fighting fantasy books people used to buy. You know, the ones that are like, you see a door, go in or keep walking, etc. Because it was all done on the spot, it could change wildly, or I could change the plot completely in one decision. You could have a little inventory of items and use or keep them. As you can see, he's just a kid, in this environment with a drunken excuse of a mother. She'd randomly tell him to shut the fuck up and the like, to which he would instantly stop talking, and just have this terrified look on his face. Poor kid. And once they all settled in, nice and tight, the drinking started. Again, she would go through phases, as Dad and I called them. Couple of days of niceness, then what Dad called the drinking day, and then just marathons of sleepless nights and binge drinking. She would accumulate empty wine bottles at the side of the sofa. I slept on the longer sofa at like a 90-degree angle to the rest of the room. I would be trying to get to sleep, and she'd still be watching TV when I got up. Matt and I would play downstairs sometimes. The floor is lava and all that stuff, with cushions, etc. Matt was such an innocent kid. It pained me to see Sue do shit like this. She'd ring into Matt's school and say he was sick. He wasn't. She would proceed to turn him into a butler for a day, bring her water, food, tablets, etc. Why? Because she was too drunk to get out of bed, that's why. And this kid would just sit watching TV all day, missing his education, just to serve his alcoholic mother her water. We went to Wales this one time. Sue quit drinking but still smoked. For the whole week she was like the calmest person ever. And I can honestly say it was such a great time in my life. I loved it so much. But good things never last. We went on another trip to a hotel somewhere. The plan was to go to this hotel, sleep overnight, go to Lightwater Valley theme park, and drop me off back at home. Matt and I got our own room together. Sue and Dad had a room that was like way over on the other side of the hotel. The night we got there, we decided to go to this little playground nearby. We get there. Sue's been drinking. And there's a few people on the playground. It's like 8 at night. There's a small group of girls on this bowl swing thing, just talking and minding their own business. Sue drunkenly walks over and starts yelling, "Come on girlies, off the swing, come on, get off," over and over. These girls are really creeped out and leave. I seem to remember one of them crying. She then reveals, as though we were just gonna clap her and give her a medal, that she cleared the swing for Matt and I. We get on, and she starts frantically getting all giddy and pushing the swing with Matt and I in it. She starts properly pushing it. We're going really high. Matt started getting scared, if I remember correctly. And then I say something like, "What are you doing? You bipolar or something?" She runs off crying. So, yeah, I guess. Dad pulls me to one side and says she got diagnosed bipolar a few days earlier, but that I should go apologize to her for getting pissed and scaring some people off a playground to erratically push Matt and I to a dangerous height on a swing. So I go over to this little obstacle course thing further down the playground, where she's seated, and I start doing the sorry shit until she shuts up whining how she wants us to have a good time and all that. I didn't believe her for a second that she wanted to have a good time with us all, and that was her entire best interests. We go to Lightwater Valley. I seem to remember she got pissed, but I was having too much fun to care about what she was doing. I got home, and that was it really. Oh wait. The event I shall now describe is known as the comment. Basically, all of Sue's kids grow up, realize she's a mess, and cut off all contact with her. She has like 3 or 4 kids, Ross and Matt being the only 2 she ever really speaks with. So one of her kids, in this case we will refer to her as Anna, had a child. It was a really nice thing, but Anna didn't want to speak to Sue, and as a result never saw her. Sue says to Dad, "Oh, Anna's had a baby," or something, to which my dad says something like, "Great, another person I'll never get to see." Zing! She did not fucking like that. Wow, she did not like that. If steam could come out of ears, she'd be a freight train. She must have decided at that point her and Dad were over, and began to make his life hell. Dad would be on the phone to a customer. She'd walk in and throw something at him and be like, "You wanker," and then walk off. It must have been pretty embarrassing. She was usually too drunk to get out of bed and run her own business. Dad was literally running a business solo. He had a few people helping, but the point was it was her company, and Dad's too, of course. They got 2 dogs, meant to get 1, but there were only 2 left, so Sue guilt-tripped Dad into getting them both. Named them Beth and China. Matt loved them to bits. Their old dog Lucy had died before they moved from their old house. Poor thing. So, the comment. Well, Sue began saying some pretty bad stuff. She would put on Facebook that Dad hit her, abused her in general, and awful stuff like that. She claimed Dad put porn on her son's computer. She rang her parents and told them Dad was hitting and abusing her. She started to cut herself for attention. She would cut herself until she had to be taken to hospital, usually overdosing too, just for Dad to drive all the way to the hospital and take her back home. One night Dad was driving her home and she was splayed across the back seat, on the phone to her parents, slurring her words as she'd been drinking. I'm upset with that man that hits me." Dad just kept driving, but she kept going. "And because he has heard me say this, he will probably beat me when I get home." Now I got it. She was trying to get my dad in prison or something similar, so he was out of her life, and she could rope in another poor man to become Matt's next dad. Literally all her kids had different last names. How did I not see this coming? I remember they had rows after rows. Dad would wake up, he has sleep apnea, and so needs all the sleep he can get, and requires the use of a machine, and she would not leave him alone for the whole day, arguing, drinking, whilst he ran her business for her. She laid off the other people working for her, so it was quite literally becoming Dad's solo mobile phone company. She kept with the whole beating and abusing stuff, accusing my dad all over Facebook how he was hitting and punching her, and her black eyes and bruises she suffered under the hand of my dad. One night, it came to a point. She stood near the bed and drunkenly slurred out, "Go on, I know you want to. Go on then, hit me." She gestured for Dad to hit her. Dad obviously did not. Instead, grabbing a suitcase and beginning to pack his sleeping machine, some clothes and his phone as well as some more things. whilst she drunkenly stammered around in the background. She grabs his sleep machine, opens the window, and launches it outside. This is some really expensive hospital lent shit here. So, this was a really bad move. Matt is standing in the doorway, rubbing his eyes with sleep. Why, you might ask? Because Sue's ordered a taxi. She doesn't know where she's going, she just ordered one to make a scene. She was now taking her child on a school night, if I remember correctly, shoving him in a taxi with a complete stranger, and going God knows where. What a truly terrifying environment. As I said a while ago, I think, my dad is in a rock band. He has been for a while and has a bit of a following around here. Sue used to come home with him and get completely pissed. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. Sue got her drinks. Dad and his sister and her boyfriend were present. At this point, Dad had married her, ages before all the shit started happening. So this was his wife, making a complete arse of herself. She gets pissed. Now when I say pissed, I don't mean a little tipsy, oops, said something I shouldn't have, oh how truly drunk I am, kind of drunk. I mean pissed, loaded, to the point where you probably couldn't hold a conversation with her for 5 seconds. She gets all rowdy, but the gig is ending. Dad packs up and decides to go to a takeaway. As they go in, there's a couple having their food. She leans over, and in one fell swoop, grabs some chips off the woman and eats them. Of course, the natural reaction is one of, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" And then she gets all bitchy about it. Sue, effing and jeffing in the middle of this takeaway. Dad honestly thought it would become a punch-out. She starts arguing and shouting to this woman, so the boyfriend gets involved. The whole, "Who the hell do you think you are?" kind of thing. My dad sees there is now potential for danger, and so tries to break it up, literally getting in front of the guy, around 20 years younger than him but still quite big, and trying to back him off and defuse the situation. As she got in the car, Dad proceeded to absolutely tear a strip off her on the way back. She tried to reverse it and pin it on Dad, but he was having none of it. This was it. It had gone far enough. He quite literally says, "Fuck this," drops her off at home, then goes to his best friend's house. Greg is a good friend of my dad's, and then my dad's other friend, Eddie, is the drummer in his band, and he has a van. The fucking heist begins. This was one of the best stories I'd ever been told before. They rock up at night. Sue's passed out drunk upstairs. They open the van, all 3 of them, and slide into the house as quietly as possible, trying desperately to pluck out anything of value, namely my dad's guitars, speakers, racks of CDs, and some clothes. He couldn't find many clothes, and he wondered why. Then he looked out the back window. She'd burnt all his clothes. They were all singed and in one smouldering heap in the back garden. Dad knew he had to go ASAP because this woman was life-threatening. He gets everything he can, including the machine that luckily landed on the grass and suffered a few scratches when he picked it up a few nights before. This was scary at this point. This woman could probably kill. He walked into the kitchen to see the dogs. They hadn't been out in days. There was shit all over the floor, and their bowls were empty. Sue later pinned one of the dogs, Beth, to him and said, "You're taking one." She's laid on the sofa next to me as I write this. Happiest dog I've ever seen. Her sister China I worry for, poor thing. He packed it all into the van and got away ASAP. He drove all the way to one of his band members' house and crashed there for a few nights. Then went to his parents' house miles away and set up camp in the spare room. He lived there for a while because he left with absolutely nothing. This woman took him in and spat him out. She was a reckless, abusive, alcoholic sociopath. Dad stayed at his parents' house for a while. The next time I saw him was to help him move out. His sister had a flat which she had recently moved out of. Being the angel she is, she lent it to my dad so he could get his life back together. It was like the flat again, just me and Dad and Beth. No sociopaths, no violence, no fear. Just a nice, comfortable father-to-son relationship. I'd go over and we'd order pizza and watch a good horror movie. Not Saw. But she just couldn't let it go. Phone calls over and over again. Leaving the phone alone usually resulted in about 20 or more missed calls. If Dad answered, it would be about him being a wanker or something. Nothing important. Dad got a call from her one day asking, no, pleading, for him to redo the website for her dramatically failing company. Being a software developer myself, I decided to throw myself into a bit of PHP and learn it more. I would use the larger TV screen to do graphic design for the website. Logos, banners, ads, etc. Dad would sort it all out and design the website with it. It was quality time spent together. Fixing problems that had come up together, and rejoicing when we fixed something. And Sue even said we'd get paid, so we finish it. Dad has a few chats with her. So we finished the website. How much do you owe us, Zan? Or words to that effect. What money? Or something equally as agitating. That scheming woman got us to devote almost a working week to making a nicely functional and appealing website, to get told no payment would be given. That's just one story. Dad would get calls like 2, 3 in the morning, huge texts about him being a twat and all that. I was there a few times he responded. One time she claimed she'd run out of tablets, and ordered Dad, with me being there, to drive all the way to hers to drop some tablets off. So recently she bought some laptops off the internet. They were very cheap but very high quality laptops. Dodgy. Dad said they looked too good to be true, basically, and was wary about the whole thing. Recently the cops busted the guy selling the laptops. He was ordering them into the company he worked at, some big music company, saying they were for staff. Now Dad wanted nothing to do with her. She had eroded Dad's credit card with a gambling addiction, ran the business into huge debts. We're talking like 40k here. And now this. She faced a huge fine. She tries to pin it on Dad, labels it as fraud. Actually rings my dad's workplace and this happens. Put me through. Who is this? It's his wife. He's wanted for fraud. So she puts the call through to Dad, but says before handing it over she was getting a call from his wife. My dad just said, get rid of her, hang up, anything. Eventually he gave in and accepted the call. She tries to warn Dad that she can take him to court and ruin him financially. Dad says he told her from the start of this dodgy deal it was bad and didn't feel right. She rings Dad's boss. Can't remember how she managed, but she did. Must have asked to get put through to his boss. My dad had to run to see his boss beforehand. He knew she was a bit of a nutcase already, but Dad explained the situation and said she was just trying it with everyone. The call comes through. Hello? No, I'm not no. Do you want to buy something? Do you want? No, I don't care. I'm not interested. Do you want to buy something? Yes or no? Then hung up on her, I guess. It was a funny shutdown, but how she tracked my dad's workplace down, she didn't know where he worked or lived, I don't know. She is clever with her malice. She is still going on today. My dad met someone new who is genuinely nice and a breath of fresh air. Beth is as happy as ever. I don't know about Matt. He must be 13 now, probably 14 in November this year. But what happened? Happened to everyone. She occasionally tries to call Dad, but he installed a blocker app. His partner just sits in shock, listening to the voicemail she keeps leaving. I was young at the time, like 10 years old, and I was scared. Don't sit in silence if this is happening to you. Tell your school, tell your parents, tell your grandparents, tell a friend, tell the internet. There are communities dedicated to helping people who are in the situation I was in out. There are some evil people out there, and abusive, alcoholic, pathologically lying bipolar sociopaths are some of them. Are included. She was a disgusting person who represented everything I disliked. In a way, this was good, as getting rid of her, so to speak, was like shaking a ragged demon from your leg. And the whole thing taught me to not trust everyone. I'm not saying become socially reclusive. I'm saying be careful. Sue was nice at first, but couldn't keep it up for long. Look at people you have your suspicions about, not as enemies, but people to take with a pinch of salt. I feel like if I had punched her, I would carry a completely different burden to the one I do now, a much worse one. Thank you all for reading and commenting. To answer a few questions. My mum was very much involved. It's just like a separate story, like a side story, if you will. She fought for me constantly and wanted what was best. Yes, my dad made mistakes, but he was depressed, diagnosed, and anything to make him get up in the morning was a huge plus. Sue became the plus out of desperation. Dad once said he married her just because it would magically solve all the problems they were having. Of course it didn't. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to episode 200 of my 3 True Scary Stories series. Thank you very much, of course, goes to everyone who allowed me to use their stories in this video. And furthermore, thanks goes to every single person who has allowed me to use the story in all the preceding videos. I'd also like to add sincerest thanks to all my lovely subscribers, the people who have stuck with me since I started telling these stories, and those who comment and they share and they like on all my videos. It is very much appreciated and has helped get me this far. Now, you might want to go make a cup of tea, grab a glass of whiskey or whatever it is you happen to do, because this is not a regular outro. I've decided, as part of the celebration of episode 200, I'm going to include a Q&A here. So, I've got quite a few questions. I'm not sure exactly how many, I haven't counted them all, I think it's about 30, so I'm going to go through them all. If I've repeated one, I'll probably not answer it, but I will at least put the question up on screen. If you did send a question in to me, I do apologise if I missed it. It wasn't intentional, I was just probably scrolling through and it slipped me by, but I think I got most of them. Okay, now on with the Q&A. Question 1. Where did I put that bloody thing? Oh, here we are. Okay, Nicole Maca, 29, I'm just going to call you Nicole. Nicole asks, she says, Hi Hellfreezer, been a big fan since the beginning, and it's pretty awesome seeing how far you've come. Here's my questions. How are you, really? Fine, thanks. Had a pretty bad start to the year, but I'm feeling not too bad right now as it happens. And if you had 1 hour, or if you had an hour with one person, dead or living, who would it be, and what should you do? Well, we'll have to have a bit of a think about this one. See, I don't really think you should meet your heroes. Never a good idea, because you'll invariably end up disappointed. There are lots of people I admire. I mean, I love Stephen Fry. I think the man's amazing. There's a very small group of people for whom I am very glad they continue to exist. We did lose some of them last year, but we held on to Stephen, thank goodness. Let me think who would want to sit down and just sit down with for an hour. Actually, you know what? I'll pick someone. Brian Blessed. Simply because that man can spin a yarn. I read his autobiography recently. Well, actually I got the audiobook, but let's just say read. And while I'm sure everything in that book happened, one way or another, I'm quite sure he's put a fair bit of spin on most of it. But it makes it very entertaining, so for pure entertainment value, Brian Blessed. Okay, next question. I'm just going to abandon number and then I'll lose track if I keep trying to do that. Okay, this one's from Mike Hunt. Not even sure if that's his real name, but I always have to be careful saying it. Okay, do you work aside from your YouTube account? If so, what is your occupation? I am a YouTuber, I do it full time. I remember you saying that you have a sister and some nieces or nephews. I actually have one of each. My nephew is, let's see, I'm 15 years older than him, so I'll be 21 this year. And I have a niece that just turned 13. They both make me feel very old when I think about how old they are. Is there a Mrs. Hellfreezer, a girlfriend, or a boyfriend? No, no, no. I think that's it for that one. Okay, on to the next one. Who do we have next? Mad Honeybee. What is your most loved spot in Scotland? Is that where you are from / living? It's alright to ask 2 questions. I have people who've asked a few more. It's quite alright to ask as many as you like. No limit. Oh, well, yes, 3 and technically 4. Okay, I'll answer the first 2 first. Honestly, I don't have a most loved spot in Scotland. The place I live now is fine. There certainly are far worse neighbourhoods. Nearby. But the fact of the matter is, I just haven't done enough travelling around to accurately say that. You know, I do plan or hope to travel around at some point. I'm a relatively solitary person, so I'll probably end up travelling on my own whenever I do it. A bit nervous about that, but yeah, and that's that. And I'll probably not even travel in Scotland when I think about it. I might go and see some other countries just because, you know, I've done Scotland. I've lived here for a while. All my life, actually. Ah, well. Okay, next question. I'll make it 3. What is your favourite taste, sweet or savoury? What is your favourite taste, sweet or savoury or bitter? Name the best food that gives you the best example of that taste. That would be caramel shortcake, so that would be sweet. It's probably my favourite. But if I'm going for savoury, then I usually go for like crisps, like cheese and onion flavour, or sour cream and onion. Those are my 2 favourites in those flavours. But yeah, sweet is probably my favourite out of all of them. Okay, I hope that answered your question properly. Who do we have next? Mike Spiegel, how old are you? I am drawing a blank at my own age. Well, I'm 35. That's it. There we go. I'll be 36 in September. Okay, this isn't really a question, but it made me chuckle when I read it, so I wanted to throw it in here. Dude, I just came to say both fuck you and you're brilliant. Because I know exactly what this video is, and I don't even want to watch it that bad. But the cute kitten made me really want to click anyway. Despite the fact that I knew I wouldn't see more kittens. So congrats, and fuck you. Well, actually, it just so happens that video that the lady there is talking about, that JG's talking about, did have one more kitten in it. What does TIFU mean? Today I fucked up. That's a common question, I just thought I'd throw it in here. By the way, yes, and Scotland, and no. Hellfreezer, I'm just wondering when we're going to see some nudes. Well, just take your clothes off and look in the mirror. Yes. Scott, that's our old friend Scott there. That's the guy that wrote the Emperor Jack story. There's actually another part of that we've got coming up at some point. I'm not quite ready to record it yet. Okay, Crystal Dawn, love that name. Hellfreezer, I still think it would be cool if you started your own subreddit. I actually do have one, where you will have automatic permission to read all stories, and we know right where to go to put our stories for my personal favourite narrator. Also, I love Glitch and Paranormal. Problem is, if you put it up there in subreddit, now unless I make it private, then you may as well just send them to my email, because it's more convenient for me to have them a story sent to my email address. And if I don't make it private, then any bugger could come along and take stories, whether, you know, it's permissions given or not, because some bad people just don't care. Okay, onward. Who do we have now? Carry Temporary. Did Hellfreezer prepare yourself for a barrage of questions? Okay. Number 1, are you anti-donation? You are one of the few channels I'm willing to pledge, but you don't offer the option. Well, I can answer that quite simply. I have no problem with taking your money. In fact, given recent events here on YouTube, for those of you who don't know, YouTube has recently lost a number of large advertisers, and I think most of us would tell you we're seeing a difference in our daily ad revenue because of that. And because of that, I am thinking about setting up a Patreon. I've been mulling it over for a while, thinking about what I can do with it. And I'm thinking the best option there for Patreon would be like a monthly parcel that I would give to Patreon supporters. I'm thinking maybe about an hour's content every month in the parcel. It'll just be random things, true stories, short stories, poems, that sort of thing. just as a bonus for anyone who wants to contribute to Patreon. But I'll need to think about what content I want to put in there. Maybe get one or two ready, then I'll set up the Patreon page. I'm actually stealing that idea from a musician, kind of former YouTube musician called Kate McGill. She does these monthly music parcels to help support herself and her music, so she can keep doing it full time. And I want to keep doing YouTube full time, so yeah, I'm probably going to end up doing that monthly parcel thing. Okay, number. I've lost my questions. Where? Oh, there it is. 1A. What is Redbubble, and are you making anything off the merch? This refers to a link I've got on my main page. For those who don't know, Redbubble is basically a t-shirt site. And no, I'm not making anything off the merch because I don't believe anyone's actually bought anything. And if I did, it'd be a very small percentage. I just simply put it up there so that the option was there for people that wanted it. I've got a few designs. Nothing much at the moment. I think there's 4 designs maybe. I might add more in time. It's just when I get bored and I want to design something, I'll come up with something t-shirt wise and I'll put it up there. Yeah. Well, there are actually a few more designs than you can see on there, but those are just ones I've done for my own personal use. It's like there was a Northern Exposure t-shirt, I did that, because you just can't buy them. I used to love that show. You remember it was set in Alaska, but the doctor goes there, complains about everything. Then a few years later he leaves. Sounds boring, but it was actually really good. And the other one was a Hannibal t-shirt. It just says, "Eat the road." It's got Mads Mikkelsen's face on it. So yeah, I don't really earn anything off the t-shirts because they don't sell. I just like to have it there. Okay, what's next? Number 2. I noticed in a tweet from last year, you said you were single. If so, why and how? Because I wouldn't shag me, I don't expect anyone else to. 2A, will you marry me? I appreciate the offer, but no thank you. 2B, I refer you to the answer to number 2. Number 3, which questions do you hope to be asked in the Q&A? I'm just happy if people ask any. Number 4, that is... What are your thoughts on your ravenous fans like me? You're not really that bad compared to some. Are you tired of the admiration? Does it make you uncomfortable? It does when people get a bit sexual. I've got to be honest with you. There's occasionally people that call me daddy, and that makes me feel a bit awkward. Right, next. Where are we? Number 5. How do you choose your collaborative efforts? Are you also anti-collab? That's not a bad thing, but I'm curious. Well, I'm not against collaborations. I don't do them too often. That's because back in the early days, when I first started doing this, I took any and every collab that was offered, or because I figured, well, they asked, were nice enough to do, so I should just say yes. But these days, I'm a bit more picky with it, and I tend to be quite polite when turning people down, but I'm more picky with it. And these days, I just choose them simply because I like the channel. They either inspired me when I got started, or maybe we started about the same time and I just so happen to like what they're doing. I like the sound of their voice. And that's really all I require. If I get the impression that somebody's just asking because they want to boost their subscriber count, and that they've probably sent a lot of the same email that day, I'm probably going to say no in that case. I hope that doesn't sound too blunt. It's just... I know it's hard to get your channel going, but really, if you're starting out, you should find other people who are just starting out and try and do collaborations with them. It also helps build up friends, you know, build up friends on the site. And it's important to do that because if you start together, you learn together, you can trade tips back and forth. And they're more likely to say yes to doing a collab because odds are if you've got 100 subscribers each, you're not going to have the same 100. And just go on like that and you build your numbers up. It takes a while. It took me a long time to do it. It took most of us a long time to do it. But that really is the best way to build your numbers up. And yeah, that's why I don't do a lot of collabs, just because I don't think most people that ask me, not all, I want to stress that, most but not all people that do ask for collabs that are newer, they're doing it just to boost their numbers. 5A, is it true that you don't collab because you know your fans only come here for your voice? No, not really. 5b. Do you feel part of the horror narration community? I have noticed you and Darkness Prevails seem almost out of the realm of the rest of them. Like you really couldn't be bothered with the rest of the community. No, I've got no problems with the rest of the community. I can't think of one that I have a problem with. But see, the thing is, a lot of, especially the biggest channels, they all started near the same time, so they got to know each other quite early on. And there are people I'm friendly with, like Unit, Mad Mike, Kingsbook. Get along quite well with all of them. I try to support the community when I can. I'll give occasional shout-outs if I think somebody, if it's a newer channel, and I think their heart's in it, or if there's any way I can help. Oh, that actually reminds me. I did want to give a shout-out to Holly Wizzle. I'm going to actually, and if I haven't done it, yell at me in the comments if I haven't done this. I'll include a link to her Twitter page, and I'm going to do that because Holly's actually trying to help a friend of hers right now. She's doing something called Deeds for Derek. A very good friend of hers is sick. He's sick, and he needs a new wheelchair and other medical equipment, which his insurance unfortunately just won't cover. So she's trying to raise funds for him. Now, I'm not personally associated with this. I've really got nothing to do with it, but she's trying so hard, and I just wanted to give a shout out. So if you go, check it out, check out the GoFundMe page. There's a link to it pinned on her Twitter page, so please, by all means, go and have a look at the page there. Okay, number 6. Do you read all of your comments? I notice you don't often reply. Never pin, thank goodness. And don't like, or is it love, cringe comments. I do actually read every single comment, and I usually go through my comments about once a week, once every 2 weeks, and I do reply then to anybody who needs a reply. I hadn't been replying for the last little while just because I was ill. That's why there weren't as many replies for the last while. Cringe comments, I'm kind of neutral on them, to be honest with you. What was your occupation prior to YouTube? I worked in a convenience store. You're vegan, right? No. Or maybe vegetarian? No. I thought I heard that on the last Q&A. No, I mentioned I'd tried a vegan macaroni and cheese recipe that turned out okay. I was just intrigued to see what something like that would taste like. And it was okay, it wasn't great, so eventually I came up with my own recipe. Tweaked the one I got from the website a bit, and it turned out quite nice. Will you ever do a live stream for us? No. Just no interest in it. Because really, what would I do? Read on a live stream? I don't see what the point of that is. You kind of need people to play off of to make it worthwhile. Have you learned anything important since starting YouTube? Yes, there are thieving bastards everywhere. I apologise for the language. Okay. Well, I've also learned the importance of not using ad blockers. So I never ever use an ad blocker on YouTube since I started doing my own videos. But I am guilty of having done it before I started making videos because I didn't quite fully appreciate just the impact it had. Okay, Amor Panda Adorable. Can you read more of Edgar Allan Poe? Yep, I'm going to read some more. I don't know when, but I'm going to read some more. Jennifer Collins, love your stories. Are you married? Nah, nobody wants me. Beth Sabe, New Rose. Al Freezer, you roll. That's not a question. By the way, what's it like to know you feel the longing dreams of so many girls? I think you might have meant to send that question to someone else, dear. I don't believe I'm making any panties drop. Most likely making women pull them up a bit higher. That's more likely the case there. Okay, who's up next? I've lost my questions again. There we go. Scott, your return. Hellfreezer, I have a very important question for you. The answer to this question will reverberate through the ages of time itself. On a scale of 1 to 10, this question rates at an importance level of 11. I shall hold my breath until I hear the answer to this very important question. Future generations will hear stories about where we were when you answered this question. My question to you is, what is your favourite potato chip? Actually, my favourite changes. Right now, the favourite thing I'm enjoying is, it's basically Skips. What it is, it's like a little, shaped like a shell, and it's prawn flavoured. But I discovered a local supermarket was selling their own cheaper version of that, but in a much bigger bag. So I've been getting them recently. Before that, my favourite one was Cheetos Flamin' Hot Spirals. But as a rule, it's usually something either cheese and onion flavoured or sour cream and onion flavoured. I've actually been enjoying sour cream and onion pretzels recently, which are really nice. Okay, moving on. Chris Martin. Sounds familiar. Anyway, Hill Freezer, where do you obtain all your awesome photos? It's what drew me to your videos in the first place. Well, what I do is, and I recommend whenever anybody starts doing their own narrations, they do this. You set a folder in your bookmarks, just mark it stock or something like that, and just go around, find a bunch of sites that you know legitimately have free images on them, that you can definitely use free of copyright, or under Creative Commons licenses. Just make sure you read the specifics of each license, and you can use them for commercial purposes in case you do want to monetize them. But most of my images come from two sites. There's one called Gratisography, and that's owned by a guy called Ryan McGuire. He does these really wonderful and very odd and whimsical kind of images. So whenever I need something that's truly eye-catching, I usually go and I take a look at his work. And they're up there pretty much. You don't technically have to give credit, but you'd have to be a complete dick not to give credit. It's just a matter of including a link on a YouTube video. So always make sure I give credit to him. And I've used a lot of his images for the thumbnails. It certainly did in the early days, not so much now, because these days I try to make sure the thumbnails are at least kind of linked to one of the stories in the videos. And the other site I use the most often is one called Pixabay. And it's just one of those things. Photographers take their images, they upload them under a public domain license. But again, you've got to just check out the pages, the About Me sections, to have a look through people's pictures before you use them. Because every now and again you'll get someone uploading pictures there who doesn't quite understand the purpose of the website. But there is a pretty big wealth of photographers on there who are sharing excellent images, and they make them available to anyone who wants to do it. Just free, but you can also make what they call coffee donations. It's like a digital tip jar, I guess, in a way. Yeah. So, that's where I get my images from. Okay, next up. Regina. Hellfreezer, will you date me if we met? Even if it's just one date? Well, probably not. Although the question is, what is your favourite potato? The question is, what? I need to go take a cold shower. But alas, I must say I am flattered, but respectfully decline. Ah, we meet again. What is your favourite shoe? Usually a Chelsea boot. That used to be. But lately I've been really enjoying my first pair of Vans I bought. So I'll probably buy another pair of them. They seem nicer than the Converse I had previously. And Malene Nikander. 3 things you can't live without. Try to be imaginative, Hellfreezer. What can't you live without? No, I can do without that. Honestly, at this point in my life, I don't think I can do without the internet. At least not for any longer than a few hours. Whenever my internet goes out, I get very antsy, because I spend so much time and essentially live a huge chunk of my life on the internet. That's 1. 2. I would have said caffeine and energy drinks until recently, but I've been cutting way back in those recently just because they're really not that great for you. And so, well, you know what? Audiobooks and podcasts. Yeah. They're useful just for entertaining you. They're an excellent distraction if you're feeling down and you just essentially need noise so that you're not alone with your thoughts. Kind of a scary way to phrase that, I guess. But they're very helpful for that. And number 3 that I can't live without. Well, I guess the last thing would be my phone. Of course, all those things I could technically live without, but it wouldn't be much of a life these days. Okie dokie. Let's see what's up next. Ah, Kerry Temporary, back up again. Kerry had lots of questions, which is very helpful for the Q&A. What do you consider... Asking the deep questions, Kerry. What do you consider your biggest insecurities, both in real life and just regarding your channel's strengths? Biggest insecurities? I'm very insecure about my appearance. I have very bad skin, you see. Terrible psoriasis, and it just seems to keep getting worse. But I keep trying new things for it. And regarding my channel, well, they kind of cross over there. You know, people keep asking you to do a face reveal, and it's just not something you want to do. Well, actually, that's not true. It's not that I don't want to do it. It's just that looking the way I do right now, I'm just not comfortable doing it. Maybe if my skin clears up, I'll think about getting a decent camera, and I might do some on-camera stuff. But until that happens, I just can't see anything changing. Yeah, but and that kind of ties into a lot of other questions, like why aren't you married, or don't you have a girlfriend or anything like that? Yeah, just not confident enough to date people. Okay, let's see what's next. Can you talk about negative comments on your videos? I know they're very rare. Have you ever deleted comments? That's why they're very rare. The fact of the matter is, compared to what some people get, I don't get many negative comments. I really don't get very many negative comments. And I certainly don't mind if people are being critical. I tend to be a bit more lax about leaving bad comments up if they're just aimed at me. But if you're essentially being rude towards people whose stories I've used, if you flat out call someone a liar, then you might notice that that comment disappears pretty quickly. There's certain things I won't tolerate, and it's a pretty small group of things I don't tolerate. Otherwise, I think I'm fairly relaxed. But again, that's because I don't get too many negative comments in compared to what others do. Are you not married? No, not married. Does the rest of your family know you make YouTube videos for a living? Not my entire family. My sister, my immediate family knows. My sister, niece, nephew, my, well, I guess technically brother-in-law, he knows. I assume the dog knows. I don't think he's a fan though. Oh yeah, and recently I did tell a chunk of other family members. I was at a funeral the other day. I mentioned I was at a funeral last week, last Thursday I think it was. And while I was there, as you often do at funerals, you see the family members that you don't really see a lot of the time. And my uncle and aunts and my cousins were there, and you know, oh, what are you doing? You still working in that place? Oh no, I quit because there were a bunch of bastards. Oh, okay, well, what are you doing now then? Well, I'm working for myself. Oh, what are you doing? And I always get nervous whenever I think about answering this question. So, well, I work online, and most people that'd be enough, but I decided just to give a direct answer, and I said, I do YouTube. I told them I just make videos, I live off the ad revenue. And they were surprised, but they thought it was quite interesting. Have you ever been in a fight? A proper fight, not since I was in primary school. And the last time I was in close to anywhere I fight as an adult was, I don't know if I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. It's when I was working in a very bad place. It was, yeah, there was a customer in one night. You see, the place I worked in, there was a pub right across the road from it. And it was a pub that was very much in support of this specific football/soccer team. Unfortunately, one of the guys from the pub was in, I think he was trying to buy cigarettes or something, that night, and there was a guy in the queue ahead of him, wearing a t-shirt for the biggest rivals of his team. So he starts giving this guy shit, and this guy's done nothing at all, poor guy. And he starts to get kind of aggravated with this guy again, he's done nothing. And it gets quite heated. And I have to stop what I'm doing, and I just kind of dart around the outside of the tills, and I get behind this guy, and I don't do anything, I just wait. Then he tries to punch him. So I grab a hold of him and I drag him towards the door. I don't actually manage to get him out of the shop. I got him as far as the door before he broke free. And good news was, he was no longer trying to punch the guy, but he was now angry at me for stopping him punching the guy. So he tries to have a go at me. Eventually I managed to restrain him, talk him down, and then in the space of like a minute, he goes from wanting to punch me to trying to kiss my hand. Yeah. Shockingly, I didn't bar that guy from the shop, but he didn't come back in for quite some time afterwards. It was quite surprising that guy actually got angry, because he was usually
often in the shop drunk. Right, he'd come in, he'd buy a lot of lotto cards, a lot of scratch cards. He'd spend a fortune on them. Always had a big wad of cash for that sort of thing. Didn't see him for months, but he was always quite friendly when he was in. Even when drunk, he was very, very friendly. And when he eventually came back in, he just kind of slunk in. He was quiet for a bit. And eventually he was back to his old self. Like, you know, his old kind of happy self, not causing any trouble. I think he'd learned his lesson after that, because that was the only trouble we ever got for him. In fact, he was the kind of guy you usually had to watch yourself if you're on the shop floor, because he would try to hug you. He even managed to get me a few times. Caught me unaware, you see. And that's a long way to answer if I've ever been in a fight. What's the most trouble you've ever been in that you're willing to discuss? I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. Honestly, never been in any major amount of trouble. I mostly keep my nose clean. Have you ever had anxiety or depression? Any other illness? Well, yeah. See, the thing is, depression's an interesting thing because it comes in various degrees. There are people who are essentially crippled by their depression. Then, in my case, I didn't realize. I knew I was down a lot. But until I quit that very bad job I mentioned, used to call La Boca del Inferno, until I quit that, I didn't realize just how fully depressed that place had made me. Because it wasn't until I left there, and it was a gradual thing because I'd been there for such a long time. It was almost like pressure being released. Or it's like, and I don't mean to exaggerate this, but this is really how it felt, like I was drowning and I was finally able to come up and breathe air. And it felt that way for such a long time that I had genuinely, and I'll be very frank with you, I had genuinely and frequently considered killing myself. Many times. Just because I figured this is my life. It doesn't matter if I leave, get another job, it's going to be the same. Nothing's ever going to improve. But it turned out it was just a really shitty place to work, and it had messed my head up so badly, I actually believed that, and believed there could be no improvement for so long. It hadn't always been that way, but certain very bad influences made it that way, and got away with it. And that is why I am so grateful to YouTube. That is why at the end of every video I say to you guys to take care of yourselves, because I genuinely do care about you. Because being able to do this job, this wonderful, wonderful job, I truly appreciate what an amazing thing it is that it came into my life. I am happier now than I have ever been. Even when I haven't been feeling well, I'm happier than I've ever been, and I've probably recovered quicker than I ever would have. Simply because of the freedom and the sense of validity and independence that working on YouTube does, in spite of the obvious problems and recent issues, which I hope are resolved. YouTube has given me an amazing fulfillment in my life. It has improved my life greatly. Physically, mentally, it has improved my life. And because of that, I'm forever thankful to not only YouTube, but to each and every one of you, because I truly do appreciate it. Every time I see a new subscriber come along, I am so thankful to you. That out of all the content out there, because there are so many channels out there that do what I do, that you chose to click subscribe and chose to stay subscribed. Because thanks to you guys, you let me take something that was just a hobby. It was a hobby that helped keep me sane for a while. Then it gradually, little by little, became a job that kind of helped bolster my income a little bit because I didn't make a lot of money. And then that job was then able to support me financially at exactly the time I really needed something else. Okay, what's next? Why don't you put timestamps in the comments? Because maybe it's because I'm using the YouTube app for Android, but I can't click those timestamps. Well, I put them in the description. I don't really think they'd be any different in the comments. But if it helps, I'll try and remember to put them in the comments in future. Okay, and I think that wraps us up Q&A-wise. Yep, that's lots of questions, so thanks very much to everyone who sent their questions in. I hope I answered them all. I hope I answered them all thoroughly. I hope I didn't get too cheeky on them. Sometimes it's very tempting. And, yeah, that's episode 200. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.